Hi, and welcome to the Generation Gap podcast, exploring key topics of our time as a grandfather granddaughter team. My name is Mary French Murphy.
And I'm Bill French, and I'm Mary's grandfather. And today we're going to talk about minimum wage. And obviously, I have many perspectives on it because I kind of lived through the generations. And um, quite honestly, minimum wage seemed to be sufficient when I was younger, but not the case today. So, Mary, why don't you kind of start this conversation because it's impacting you a lot more than it impacted me when I was your age.
Yeah. Well, when we think about minimum wage, first of all, I'd like to bring to mind okay, what is the purpose of minimum wage and minimum wage jobs? Is minimum wage supposed to be the minimum wage that you need to live and survive? Or is it just the minimum we can give people without it being criminal? So I think that's firstly an important question to ponder because I see a lot of people working minimum wage jobs full time, right? And uh, how they got there, why they're there, who knows? People go through all types of issues in life, and right now finding work is very difficult. I know we have a lot of immigrants as well that are jumping into that's all they can do when they get here, right? So the question of a minimum wage, well, firstly, you can't survive off of a minimum wage job these days. Like that is undeniable. You even as working full time, even if it's a benefits job, it includes benefits.
Yeah.
You can't.
And it's interesting you bring that up because I was just curious and I went back and didn't go back a long time.
Mm.
Basically, I just went back to 1990 and I got some kind of startling information here,
Yeah.
which is kind of scary.
Yeah.
But I want to show you.
Pull that up.
Yeah. Okay. So when you look at it, in 1990, like how many hours did you have to work to pay your rent? And we know rent was a lot less in 1990 than it is now. So basically, it took 40 hours. So basically, a week. That made some sense. But even by 95, it increased 25%, you know, and needed 50%. In other words, almost a week and a couple days. And then by 2005, basically it had increased by 50%. And what's kind of curious, if you notice, the minimum wage, that's what's at the bottom there, was also going up. And then by 2015, like I had 10-year kind of increments in this, basically you had to work 90 hours. In other words, over 2 weeks. Let's assume a month is 160 hours. And today, basically, you pretty much at least 3 weeks is going to that. So for everything else in your life, you really have 1 week's pay. And that is very scary. When you think about it, on one hand, if you look, basically the labor rate effectively tripled, but unfortunately, there's only so many hours in a month you can work. So before, when you were using 25% of the hours to pay your rent, it was okay. But now you're paying 75% of your monthly income. So that's scary stuff. So that was even like very disheartening for me. And I'd like to know how we got there. And I definitely have some thoughts on it.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, I mean, the thing with minimum wage, too, right, is ideally you don't want to have a minimum wage job that you're working. Ideally, you have people contributing to society in specialized roles that have education, that have, you know,
Right.
they participate and they give something into society. Uh, Retail workers, like cashiers, things like that, is traditionally has been like a high school job or someone who's filling hours or someone who wants to get a couple more hours, right? That's ideal. I mean, still, we want to look at the proportions. Is it worth what you're paying someone? But then there's the whole other side now of people who are desperate for work, and well, that's pretty much what they get. Now, the other thing as well is I've been in specialized roles that I've put a lot of money in education and time and expertise, like several years of expertise, and I have a couple dollars over minimum wage, right? Well, that's still not cutting it, right? That's
Right.
still nothing. And I know other people as well who are very, very specialized, amazing, probably even the best in their field. And they're not making too much more than minimum wage either, if you're thinking about it, right? It's a good deal more. You're not going to get that working at a retail job or selling coffee or doing things like that. Um, but it's still, like, because of how low and how disproportional the job is to, like, minimum wage jobs are to the cost of living, it's still unrealistic even when you're making, I don't know, double minimum
Yeah.
wage,
Yeah.
quite
Yeah.
honestly. So that's an issue. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, it looks like it's not trending in a better position. Unfortunately, in order to live with like your own apartment or your own house and having a lifestyle that's not just paycheck to paycheck, these days you have to be either a manager or an owner of a company that's doing well, or one of these high paying, high experience level jobs in order to have a sustainable life, or have a partner and you both have pretty good jobs, but it's not super high responsibility. So I think it's interesting because what is our population's response to that supposed to be, right? And what is encouraging people to be in medium to low paying jobs,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So, and I think, it's probably worthwhile a little, kind of little history on minimum wage. A lot of the kind of minimum wage came about because, there are certain areas where certain companies dominated, like all the jobs were with one company. So, and you had some very benevolent, kind of company owners and that wanted to make sure that their employees had a reasonable life. As a matter of fact, you can go back and you'll even find certain big companies like I'll use Bata Shoes for example. Do you know when they came to Canada, they effectively built an entire town. It's called Bataville.
Hmm.
They had basically recreation and everything, and they even provided the housing,
Hmm.
and people had a pretty good life. I think it's called Smithville today,
Okay.
but and it's on the way to Ottawa. So that was an interest. That was a benevolent owner, but then they had probably aggressive owners. So that's kind of how the minimum wage came into play. That people should be able to survive, and but again, I think there was a lot more capitalism at the time, and capitalism, in some ways, I think took care of some of it. Because think about it, the North American economy, and probably Europe, was built on what we call a blue collar worker now,
Hmm.
you know, and uh, and of course they wanted a good workforce because they wanted to produce a good product or service or whatever, and there wasn't as much focus on automation, so he had a lot of labor component, and they were well paid. Like I think of my father and some of my relatives that worked at a tire factory in Barrie. They had a really good, middle income. They had disposable kind of money. They could take vacations. They could improve their house. They could have a car. And they didn't live, extravagantly, but they didn't have to look at the wolf at the door every week. So I think that's how it started. And kind of everything. When government gets involved, it seems to get messed up somewhere along the line. And, a livable wage. And the problem is, I think the real problem is, yeah, we need a livable wage now. But probably when I was your age, I'm not sure 10% of the workforce was being paid minimum wage.
Hmm.
And now I wouldn't be surprised it's 40 or 50%.
Hmm.
And that creates a huge problem. Um, and of course, what happens now? If you're a small company, you have a few employees, what are you trying to do? You're trying to see if you can get more work out of the existing employees so you can have one less. And I think you've seen a lot of that, where it's less and less, and you just talk to people in minimum paying jobs. I mean, they work hard,
Hmm.
no doubt about it. A lot harder than a part time, minimum wage person would have worked in my day.
Hmm.
And so, but I don't, quite honestly, I don't have the answer. How do you get around it? I mean, part of it is, um, if you did bring back some of those like manufacturing jobs,
Mm-hmm.
yes, you would see that minimum wage group move into, and not even super skilled, but reasonable skilled kind of activities. Um, let's face it now, if you are a tradesperson
Hmm.
and you have a trade, you're making a good living, but there's not that many. I mean,
If you own your trade,
yeah,
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 because there are also people in trades
yeah,
that still aren't making.
yeah.
I mean, they're maybe getting by, but
Oh yeah, yeah. On the
it's
lower
not
end of
enough.
trade, if
Yeah.
you're in a construction site and you're just looking around lumber and all that stuff, you're gonna be paid minimum wage. And but the carpenters and so forth are making a reasonable kind of wage. And so that's where, quite honestly, our economy came from after the Second World War.
Mm.
You know, basically products and services. Probably before the Second World War, nobody really talked about disposable income,
Mm.
like extra money at the end of the day
Mm-hmm.
after you bought your food, your shelter, and your clothing and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where that came about. And quite honestly, the heydays were 50s, 60s, and probably 70s,
Mm-hmm.
and started deteriorating in the 80s, when we went to a concept of a global village, and so okay, let's move those dirty jobs to the Far Eastern or Asia or whatever.
Mm.
Well, those are good paying jobs, I can tell you that because I know that because, as I said, my father and his relatives and some of the friends and that I had, they had a good living, basically going to a factory every day, doing whatever they're doing, come in. So now, basically, most of the minimum, uh, like all the minimum paid jobs are in the service industry for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, when you look at, because I looked at this a while ago, probably, you know, probably 40 years ago, 50 years ago, 50% of people worked in, manufacturing,
Mm.
50% worked in services, banks. I'm talking about banks, everything. I'm talking about doctor's office banks. I mean, I'm talking about a lot of good paying jobs, not
Mm.
just the minimum. And now it's probably, I'm sure it's 90% service, 10% manufacturing.
Well, yeah, and the AI boom's just gonna make that worse, right? Because
Yeah,
all of those types of jobs now can be taken over by
yeah,
AI models that, in the end, are much cheaper and
right.
drive the companies further,
Yeah,
right? Which means, again, those services types roles
yeah,
they can be replaced, but it might be nice to have an actual human representatives in some places. I imagine that that's going to stick around for at least a little bit longer, but those are, again, those minimum wage jobs, right?
yeah,
So, I mean, the AI crisis is, and that's a whole other conversation, but that's going to be ending up taking away a lot of jobs. And what I'm noticing as well is when you have those middle jobs taken out and you have a lot of, well, I mean, people putting in a lot of effort and not seeing a whole lot of payback, you're seeing a lot of people just kind of giving up on the hard work route and going to, you know, social media and other big booming types of jobs online, faceless jobs, AI controlled jobs, those types of things, and making their money off that, right? The people that don't put quite so much actual physical time, work, energy into it and finding a different route to wealth, right? So I think that dynamic is changing. And if you're going the traditional route, it's either okay, you take an education or a specific college course route to take something like we talked about last
yeah,
week, like engineering or doctorate or things like that. or you're stuck in the old ways of working through minimum wage jobs and maybe working your way up the ladder, which is increasingly low payout for what the time and money and life and energy that you're putting into it. Or there's people that are trying to find a new way to get things done, right? And I think things are going to look a little bit different in the coming years in terms of what work is and what work is available, even, right? And I know in Canada there's been bills being put out for a while about a minimum, like a minimum wage given to just everybody that's
Yeah.
acceptable to everybody.
Yeah, I
I
think they
know
call it living wage or what.
living
Yeah, yeah,
wage.
yeah.
This year, I mean, there's been lots of different bills proposed in different years. This year, there was another one that came out. I'll just pull it up real quick here.
Yeah, one thing is you look that up. One of the things that always worries me, um, and I don't think we realize it, and I guess I do because of my age, the more and more control we give to government, the more they control us.
Mm-hmm.
And like it always sounds good in the beginning, but then sustaining it becomes an issue. Like I just want to touch on a couple. Like I mean, there's arguments on both sides, and I'll make my comments. And of course, the idea of a minimum wage is to reduce poverty, and of course, it's a real problem now. When quite honestly, with minimum wage, it would have been very very small percentage of the population that was probably really in poverty per
Mm-hmm.
se. Um, of course, the upside, well, everybody earns more money, boosts consumer spending.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's what may have got us into this predicament of
Well,
this disposable income. Oh, like if I got $2 extra, let's just spend it.
we're
Yeah,
a consumerist society, and we're
yes,
still living off a consumerist type lifestyle
yeah,
when the last few years we cannot sustain that lifestyle. We are living in inflation situations
yeah,
where living costs are too high for what the money coming in is,
yeah,
and we're still stuck in a consumerist mentality. So people are still acting like everything's normal and trying to, and have the same pastimes and extra nice things that they had before. But the time cannot sustain that right now. We have to get out of the mentality that we're a fortunate society that can have access to those things. We can't be a consumerist society if you are living on a medium to minimum wage uh, income.
yeah.
That's just, yeah.
Another statistic I read, I think it was this week or last week, which kind of shocked me. You know, every country seems to have debt, which is fine, supposedly. Um, but um, when you look at consumer debt in Canada, um, it's one of the highest in the world
Mm-hmm.
relative to. I always hate this gross national product, which is all economics and the economy brought together. Um, we're way over like 110 or 115%
Mm-hmm.
of the total economy, where the U.S. has huge, huge government debt, but their consumer debt is much lower. And and to me, that compounds it more. I just want to touch on some other things like the pros, obviously reduce poverty, consumer spending, improving worker morale and productivity. Well, maybe, maybe. Um, I think you offset that because I know there's been surveys, if an employee was giving some health benefits or whatever, would they take that over an increase in hourly wage? Most of them say yes,
Mm-hmm.
which makes some sense. And of course, the idea is reducing on government programs if we had a higher minimum wage like unemployment insurance and all that. Well, the reality is there is an opposite position to that. There's no question about it. If you're running a business and the labor component's a big deal of it, which most service industries are, you know, it's an increasing cost for employers. Well, somewhere along the line, they have to pass that on. Um, and most employers, as soon as they're faced with increasing labor, and this even happened when certain businesses were unionized.
Mm.
Well, they tried to find a more efficient way of using their employees. And typically it wasn't more employees, it was less employees, redefining jobs and so
Mm-hmm.
forth. Um, and of course, the biggest impact is going to be in small business because you're the ones that are just making a go of it, and there's so many kind of pressures on them. Um, and of course, I think there's an argument that you know the more things increase, you do create inflation,
Mm-hmm.
and so um, I'm not sure what the answer to minimum wage is. Um, like to me, it is bringing good jobs because when I say blue collar jobs, relative to even in my like uh, my background is manufacturing, kind of pre-recorded media. Now we always took the position we want to pay in the 75 percentile of what workers made in that field, and that was quite good. That was probably double the minimum wage even back then. Um, but the reality is, we wanted good employees, so that's what we paid there, um, and we wanted them to really enjoy working. So we did a lot of things to make their social well-being and that, and we had health benefits and all those kind of things. And they made a good living, and they were able to kind of take care of their lives and had some disposable income. Well, and the nice thing is, when that labor component, let's assume it went up 5%, because the labor component in my business at that time was probably less than 10%
Mm.
of the product. Like the goods and so forth were more of the product, like the raw materials and that. So the labor was processing it. So if the labor went up 5%, its impact on the overall price was 0.5%.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're running a pizza shop, well, don't be surprised if labor is 75%. So when it goes up 5%, I'm sorry, that's 4% increase in your cost.
Yeah.
So I
So the
think that,
cost
yeah,
of everything goes up if
yeah,
minimum wage goes up, and it's a vicious cycle
yeah,
because people need more money to afford to pay for things.
right,
And then the companies need more money because the cost of hiring and keeping employees is very expensive,
right.
right? So it is a vicious cycle. I did pull up here. So
Okay,
the recent bill is Bill S-206 for those who live in Canada. There's been many proposed like it in, well, a couple proposed like it in the previous years, but essentially what it is for an act to develop a national framework. So it's to develop the framework for it, not necessarily enact it, for a guaranteed livable basic income. I'm just going to read the
yeah,
preamble here quickly. Whereas every person should have access to a livable basic income, whereas the provision of a guaranteed livable basic income would go a long way towards eradicating poverty and improving income equality. So that's interesting, right? Um, my question is, where's the money supposed to be coming from for this basic livable income? And we're talking about income equality. That is a scary word for me.
yeah.
You know what that sounds a lot like? Communism.
Well, it is. I think, man, like in Canada, we just don't realize it. We're a socialist country, approaching communism.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been led into this because we have so many government programs and all that type of thing. And let's face it, your generation, probably in some ways even my children, your parents, um, they were starting to be exposed to it dramatically when they were young. My parents, it was different. Basically, was you got to go work hard or you're going to starve to death. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, that's not nice.
Mm-hmm.
But also, there was things changed. Half the population lived in rural Canada. Now, less than 5% does. So when they lived in rural areas, a lot of them were on farms. They had multiple income streams sharing. like the labor component where you're children, when you're running farms. And so, quite honestly, everybody was participating. You could argue, my goodness, those kids, they're basically being abused with the labor component. But the family enjoyed themselves, and obviously they had a livable wage. Um, and I think the big problem is, and I just wonder, I don't know how you would ever overcome this, is it because we're so focused on an individual being able to afford his own home and all that,
Mm-hmm.
that maybe it's distorted?
Mm-hmm.
I just wonder because I think of when I first started working, it's not even, well, I mean, it was crazy. I mean, and it's not, yeah, it's 50, 60 years ago now, so I guess give or take. But like people think, what? Like I made $250 a month,
Mm-hmm.
but basically it cost me $50 a month for my accommodation.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it was 20%.
Mm-hmm.
Well
Which
now
is very good.
now it's
Very good margin.
75%.
Yeah.
So to me, forget about what I made. It's not relative. But the only reason I even mentioned that, because I worked at the TV station, and we like they were all young people in those days. Well, as people got hired, and we probably paid 20% over minimum wage at the time. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't super, but it was good because they had some benefits. But it was interesting. There's always four or five of them that would live together. They'd rent a house together. They'd rent an apartment together.
Mm-hmm.
And that seemed to be quite common back then. Nobody lived on their own. I can remember my brother, three of his buddies, they rented an apartment.
Yep.
And they had fairly good income because they were more into trucking and that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wonder if, is part of the problem our mindset? I
Oh
don't know.
yeah, I
I don't
100%
know.
agree. We are
Yeah.
definitely in a hustle, make it for yourself mindset
Yeah.
system, right?
Yeah.
Which is ironic because of the way the way everything is set up, right? With the living cost
Yeah.
of living, and I mean, community is so important, and I know there's ways that we attempt to make that, but in many ways it can be, you can live in a big city, and depending on what you choose to do with your time, you could be completely isolated still.
Yeah.
Hustle culture is a big thing. Again, consumerist mentality. We're still stuck in the way maybe we came up in the country that we knew growing up. The one where, you know, you buy extra things when you have extra money, right? And that's just kind of part of your life. We have our phones where we're maybe not financially consuming, but mentally consuming constantly, right? So we're geared towards a consumerist mentality, towards we're a first world country, so we have everything we need, right? Or everything we want is possible, and we're so lucky, right? Ooh, this is a great place to live.
Yeah.
I mean, people emigrate from countries because the cost of living is too high, and because they can't make a life for themselves, right? That's why people emigrated from different countries in past generations to Canada. But I fear that Canada's moving in a direction where, unless you are aiming to be a millionaire or a six-figure income, it probably makes more sense to emigrate out of the country.
Yeah. No, and quite honestly, I think you're right. Um, North America was a unique, like experiment. I call it. Like I think the U.S. is a bigger experiment, but North America was a unique experiment where there was opportunity, but you worked hard for it. And I just think and there wasn't any instant gratification up until, quite honestly, after the Second World War. There wasn't. There was. It was people struggled and they worked hard. The first hint at really recognizing kind of consumerism, I have to say, is probably Henry Ford.
Mm.
Like if you read the history of it, the first Model T or whatever, basically, he could sell it for $495. And his concept was very simple. Like probably the wage at that day was anywhere from $1 to $3 a day, the wage. He recognized the fact that, okay, people don't make enough money to even pay $495 for a car. So he purposely, if you read any of the history, he paid his employees $5 a day. And why? So they could afford to buy a Ford Model T. So, and obviously, that succeeded. And there's other kind of industrialists at the time that recognized that, if you want to build an economy, yes, you have to reward your employees, but now we've got in this whole, like, I was never a big fan of unbridled trade, and the terminology is free trade. I never thought it was fair, that you could move making a widget, say, out of our country to a third world country where there was no concern about environmental impact, labor, all that, and then we'd buy it. And why governments allowed, like, big industry to do that. And that started in the 70s. And, of course, now, that's where a lot of, the kind of good jobs are. I don't think he'll succeed, but I think the idea Trump has, and, okay, don't shoot us for saying that word, but it may be idealistic, but he would like to slowly bring back some of those manufacturing jobs where the only consumer is in North America, and I think there's a legitimacy to that. Like protectionism, you can argue that it's not a good idea and so forth, and I won't even comment on some of his crazy tariff stuff, but the reality is those are the jobs because, again, as a proportion of the selling price of their commodity or product, is insignificant. So you can raise that hourly rate up for a person can have a decent life, and of course that's the problem. What we define as the decent life. I remember my mom and dad telling me, when they first got married, they both worked at basically in the service industry and a hotel. As a matter of fact, if anybody's in the area, the Georgian Hotel in Midland. Well, they lived there, and they got their food, and they got not much money, and basically, and then my father was able to, an opportunity came along to work in a meat factory. So he worked in that, and they started getting little, and then they were able to rent a house, and then he went and served in the Second World War, and they did a great thing. It's called the Veterans Loan. After the Second World War, he got a loan and bought a farm. And from there, he progressed. And we never starved to death, So it was a total different expectation. And so I think, like, my parents tried to make my life better, and I probably tried to do the same with my own children. I hopefully emphasize that, yes, you have to work hard and do all those kind of things and contribute to society. But at the same time, probably partial helicopter parent. I don't want anything bad to happen to my children. Well, I think the next generation after me was worse. Like, totally want to take care of all their children their entire lives. And I'm not sure that's working. And now we're at a situation that even those parents now, they're having a more difficult time. Their house prices went up, their mortgage, their gas, all those kind of things. And I don't think there's an easy answer to this. But I'd love someone to suggest, this is the answer. But if the answer is government should do this, I don't accept that answer because it'll cost us twice as much. Like right now, we don't even seem to worry about debt. We just declared in Canada, effectively, more debt than we typically accumulate in about 10 years in one fiscal year. And,
Where'd that'll go?
pardon?
Where'd that'll go?
Well, into programs and that we probably can't afford, and those kind of things. And we don't pay enough attention to that. Um, and everybody thinks government, should be the helicopter parent now. If I have a problem, government should take care of it. Well, the only money the government has is what we gave them. And if we give them less, they're going to have a difficult time, kind of servicing it. Like the idea, I like the thought of a livable wage, but who's going to pay for it? And of course, there's the discussion. Well, there's multimillionaires and that, and there's billionaires and that. But I'm sorry, if you grabbed all their income and really taxed them high, it still wouldn't make the significant impact on everything, which is my worry.
Yeah, and the issue is not taking from the rich and giving to the poor, because money is created all the time. Like people can become millionaires, people can become wealthy, right? It's just, I think, the way the system is set up right now, it's people stuck in a mindset of grinding a 9 to 5 versus, I think there's lots of changes on the horizon for how money is made and how we go about doing that. And that's a whole, I think we could have a whole part 2 on this topic, to be honest.
Oh, yeah.
But just some food for thought. Let us know what you think.
No, and I think that the purpose of this is not really even create a great debate. The purpose of our podcast is really, we'd like people to think, gather your own information. We gathered a bit for this podcast, and quite honestly, you may totally disagree with us. Maybe you have the magic solution. Well, share that with friends and that. And one thing that we're trying to, and we'll probably try and end each podcast in that, the big thing is think for yourself. Don't be part of group think. Don't just say, well, so-and-so says, and they must be right. Well, they may be, and they may be wrong. I found over my 79 years, typically when I'm on the wrong side of the argument, it makes more sense. So I'm not sure if that makes sense, but it doesn't really matter. So the one thing we do ask you to do, don't be a parrot.
Thanks for listening in, everyone.
Have a great day, and God bless you all.